If you think Greek myth is about believing in gods, then you were taught it wrong. The Greeks never asked what you believe. What they asked was how you live. And that changes everything because myth was never a religion. It was a map of reality and a manual for the human psyche. I felt the need to make this episode exactly here. After exploring what we call the dark psychology of the Greeks, and after the episodes on Zeus, Hera, and Poseidon, I just felt that something essential needed to be said, because Greek myth is not about belief, it's not about worship. And definitely, it is not religion in the modern sense. Greek myth is about structure. That's why the Greeks did not speak about believing in the gods. They spoke about theis, syzin. Not to worship the gods, not to obey the gods, but to live in accordance with the gods. Because they, the gods, are the very fundamental structures of reality, the forces that govern the cosmos, the psyche, and life. So, to syzin with the gods, to live together with the gods, meant to live in harmony with those structures, with these essences that create the world. To think in accordance with them, to act in accordance with them, and to shape one's life according to measure, rhythm, and order. And this is why impiety or atheism for the Greeks was neither disbelief or a way to see the world. It was a disorder. It was a life lived without proportion, out of rhythm, out of alignment with the nature of things, with what makes the world move. So to honor the gods meant to recognize how reality works and not to violate its inner laws. And this is why myth was never theology in the modern sense. It was orientation. It was a way of learning, of understanding how to inhabit the world without breaking its structure and without breaking oneself. So they were describing forces, how order emerges, how consciousness moves, how the psyche loses its center, and how it can recover it. Myth is a language used when reality is too deep to be reduced to formulas. And most people see Greek myth the wrong way. They see stories about gods, ancient entertainment, or moral lessons for children. But we are talking about a symbolic architecture that maps how reality organizes itself and how the human being collapses when inner order is lost. Because once you see the logic behind it and the method, every episode becomes usable as inner mechanics, as an inner understanding of the psyche. Philosophy speaks in concepts, and myth speaks in images. And images are not less important, they are compressed intelligence. What myth does is something extremely important for the human cognition. Myth does not give you any conclusions, it gives you patterns. And by working with images instead of definitions, it trains the mind to recognize relationships, recognize recurring structures and hidden correspondences across different levels of reality. This is what we call today pattern recognition, the capacity to see unity inside multiplicity, and order inside complexity, meaning inside the apparent chaos. But myth does something more. It activates creative imagination. This is not fantasy, this is not escapism. It is the faculty that can hold multiple meanings at once, move freely between image and concept, sense, structure, before everything is articulated. And this is why myth speaks in images. From a modern perspective, we can describe this very precisely. Myth engages both hemispheres of the brain at the same time. The analytical faculty that recognizes structure and relation, and the faculty of imagination that understands the whole picture, symbols and living meaning. In other words, myth trains the mind to function holistically, and this is something modern education almost never does. Ancient education was not about producing specialists, it was not about producing workers, it was initiation. Its goal was to form a human being capable of understanding the world as a whole, understanding the self as part of this whole, and recognize the invisible structures that govern both. Music, myth, mathematics, geometry, poetry, philosophy, they were not separate subjects, they were different languages pointing to the same reality. The aim was not utility, the aim was wholeness. To create a human being with integrated perception, capable of self-governance, and capable of measure, and capable of receiving truth. Modern education has a very different purpose. It is not initiation, it is conditioning. It does not ask what kind of human being is this person becoming. It asks what function can this person perform. The modern educational system is designed to prepare the individual to become a component of a productive mechanism, whether that individual later suffers or feels alienated, loses meaning, or collapses psychologically. This is totally irrelevant to the system, because the system does not aim at wisdom, it aims at efficiency. And this is the crucial point now. A human being with holistic perception cannot easily become a cog in the machine. Someone who sees patterns, who recognizes inner causality, who understands themselves and the world as a living whole, will never fully submit to what we call modern civilization. Because beneath its surface, beneath its politeness, our modern civilization often hides violence, barbarity, manipulation, lies, and hypocrisy. So such a human being cannot be managed through fear, reward, or habit, because such a human being requires truth. And truth is precisely what systems of mass production cannot afford. This is why myth was essential in ancient education, not because people were naive, but because myth trains the exact faculties that make a human being free. Pattern recognition, creative imagination, inner coherence, and the capacity to see beyond the appearances. Myth does not tell you what to think, it teaches you how to see. And once that faculty is developed, no system can easily replace reality with narrative or truth with utility. It is a map of consciousness, and it is a training ground for the human mind. So the real question is not, did it happen? The real question is, what structure of reality is being revealed here? And this is why myths survive, even when belief systems collapse. They are not stories, they are diagrams, and people who cannot read myths totally bypass them. I already mentioned this on the episode of the dark psychology of the ancient Greeks, but I will recapitulate here. Later Platonists, especially Proclus, made this explicit. A myth can be read on multiple levels, and each level is valid. Narrative, the surface story; cosmic, forces and patterns of nature; psychological, states and conflicts of the soul; metaphysical, principles like unity, measure, descent, the invisible effects of motion; and theology, not as dogma, but as the vision of the one behind multiplicity. When modern people ridicule myth, they almost always attack the first level. They mock the story, or dismiss it as primitive imagination, or treat it as childish fiction. And they do this not because myth is shallow, but because they have been trained to remain on the surface. Modern education does not teach the mind how to move beyond levels. It does not teach how to unite analysis with imagination. It does not cultivate the faculty that can hold image and concept together. Most people were never taught how to connect their two modes of cognition, the analytical and the imagination, to connect it into a single creative act of understanding. So they do exactly what the system trained them to do. They stay literal, they stay fragmented, and they stay confined to appearances. And from that position, myth can only look ridiculous. But myth works with all the levels at once. The Greek myths never separated story from cosmos, psyche from nature, image from truth. And that's why the Pantheon, it's not just a family tree of gods, it is a map of reality, and that is exactly how this entire series is meant to be read. To understand the Pantheon properly, we must abandon this idea of characters. Each god is a dynamis, a power, a mode of being, a pattern of motion, a function inside cosmos and soul. And their relationships are not gossip, they are diagrams, how one force gives rise to another, and how order stabilizes and how collapse begins. When we say Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Dimitra, we are not just listing names, we are moving through a sequence of ontological principles. According to Socrates in Plato's Kratilos, the name Zeus, Zeus, Deus, Dios, as we said, points to something very precise, dia ion, which means that through which things pass. Zeus is not speech, he is not articulation, he is not reasoning. Zeus is the condition of relation itself. He is that which allows things to relate, allows forces to pass through one another, allows order to emerge at all. He does not speak, he does not transmit, he does not articulate, he enables articulation. He is the pre-logical part, so to speak. If we use modern language carefully, Zeus is not just a function inside the psyche, he's the very axis that makes any function possible. Without Zeus inside us, there's no psyche, only fragments. And this is where the modern problem begins, because the contemporary way of seeing the world, the way we are trained to perceive reality through the educational system, is radically disconnected from this understanding. We are not taught to recognize an axis, we are taught to see objects without relations, functions without unity, information without meaning, and the modern mind is trained to analyze parts without even sensing the principle that binds them. As a result, the idea that such an axis exists, not only in the structure of the world, but also inside our own inner world, becomes almost unthinkable. We look for order outside and we look for authority outside. We look for coherence in systems, ideologies, and institutions. But the Greeks were pointing elsewhere. They were pointing to the fact that the same axis that holds the cosmos together is also the axis that can hold a human being together. And when that axis is not recognized, the result is not simply ignorance, it is fragmentation. A fragmented perception of the world, a fragmented psyche, and a fragmented sense of meaning. This is why Zeus is not a belief. He's not a mythological character. He's not some kind of theological claim. He's a structural principle. And without the recognition of that principle, both education and culture produce individuals who are highly functional but internally divided. So where is the logos here? The movement of logos belongs to Hermes, as we will see in the upcoming episode of Hermes. Hermes is articulation, transmission, mediation, direction. Logos moves only through Hermes. Hermes is the messenger, the bridge, the very nervous system of meaning. If the Pantheon is understood as neural architecture, Hermes is the signal. He moves freely between Olympus, conscious mind, Earth, the body, and Hades, the unconscious. Hermes is the synapse, the gap between neurons, the electrochemical jump, and turns a perception into movement. And that jump can become Aries when movement erupts as force, impulse, or confrontation, or it can become Artemis when movement appears as instinct, as precision, an immediate response. Without Hermes, thought cannot reach action, meaning cannot articulate, and consciousness cannot translate itself. And beyond Hermes, we have Pan. Pan is not logos. Pan is wholeness before articulation. The totality that does not need to speak because it already contains everything. Pan is the pre-conceptual unity of things, of nature, of psyche and world. So here we have a clear structure. Zeus is the very condition of passage. Hermes is the movement and articulation of logos. Pan is the living totality before speech. And if you confuse these, the entire map collapses. Now we can kind of understand the triad we have reached as far in this series of the gods, not as mythology, but as inner structure. Zeus is coherence, the axis, the binding condition. Hera is rhythm, continuity, maturation through time. And Poseidon is becoming, the depth, the emotion, the memory, the changes. So psychologically, Zeus is intelligibility, Hera is continuity, Poseidon is movement and depth, and every human life is a a negotiation between these three. And as I said during the first episode, when this negotiation fails, the Greek dark psychology begins. The Greeks did not divide reality into good and evil substances. They divided it into what is in accordance with nature and what has moved away from it. When measure is lost, structure collapses. Not because a demon attacked the soul, but because the axis was abandoned. And this collapse was personified as monsters. We have Medusa, Hydra, the Minotaur, the Sphinx. These are not enemies outside us. They are mirrors. Forms that the psyche takes when it loses its center. The Greeks mapped this sequence precisely. Hybris is the expansion beyond measure. Ati is the blindness of judgment. Nemesis is restoring pressure from reality. And Tisis is the consequence completing the cycle. And this is not mythology, this is inner physics. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You see it everywhere, in individuals, in society, in history. So from now on, when you watch this series, ask one question again and again and again. Where is this force active in me today? And I think now we can move on to the rest of the Pantheon. After coherence, rhythm, and becoming, the whole system must enter embodiment. And Demetra is not the goddess of agriculture. She's the principle of form, of nourishment, of the body and the mind that can receive meaning. If Poseidon is the sea of experience, Demetra is what gives experience weight. So in the next episode, we move from the ocean to earth, and from movement to nourishment, from the depths of the psyche to the matrix that starts shaping. Thank you very much. Bye.